Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why did the Prime Minister abandon his vote on his centrepiece $80 billion handout to big business today? Is this just another failure of this Prime Minister? Or has the Prime Minister struck a secret deal with the One Nation Party to delay the vote giving $80 billion to big business until after the upcoming by-elections?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Yeah, I thank the honourable member for his question. And speaking about secrets, Mr Speaker, the honourable member kept his slashing assault on small business a secret from his shadow cabinet, from his caucus, from his mystified colleagues, including the Deputy Leader, kept a secret from them until he dropped that bombshell and announced that he was going to put at risk 5 million jobs. 4.8 million, to be precise, Australians work for businesses with a turnover of under $50 million. And those jobs are put at risk by this Leader of the Opposition in this captain's call, this relentless assault on small and family business. Now the Parliament will be breaking for 6 weeks or so, and everyone will be out campaigning hard, no doubt. It's going to be very interesting for the Leader of the Opposition. Where is he going to go? What about he says he's going to be visiting small business, perhaps a high-vis opportunity. Oh yes, he could be going to Stubbs Constructions in Burnie. He could be going to see Penguin Composites. He could be going to do that with the candidate in Braddon. The candidate in Braddon announced on her Facebook page how Labor was backing Penguin Composites. She obviously wasn't watching the 7:30 report when that company was denouncing the savage assault on their business by the Labor Party. So where is he going to go? He can't go to any family business, any small and medium business, no more high-vis. Where's he going to go? He could have a cup of tea with some seniors and talk about the 28% of their income he's taking away. Or he could talk to some workers in the construction sector and talk about his assault on the property industry. Or he could talk to some of the members of what he describes as the top end of town, people on average weekly earnings, sort of $80,000, $90,000, and explain how he is going to deny them, if he gets into government, the opportunity of a lower tax rate. Right around the country, Australians will know that the Leader of the Opposition and the Labor Party stand for higher taxes. They stand for higher taxes on business, large and small. They stand for higher taxes on families. They stand for higher taxes on property and investment and on retirees. And that means the Labor Party stands for less economic growth, fewer jobs and lower wages. I look forward to the Leader of the Opposition's tiptoeing through all the landmines he's created around Australia.
The member for Petrie.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister please outline to the House why it is important to back small and family and medium businesses and not penalise those who seek to create jobs for all Australians? Is the Prime Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question, and I acknowledge the passionate advocacy he brings for small business and his community, and of course coming from a small business background himself. He knows exactly about the enterprise, the determination, the confidence that is required for thousands of small businesses across Australia to invest, to employ and to get ahead. And what we have under our economic plan, which is working and delivering in more jobs and stronger economic growth, we have a plan that delivers lower taxes and delivers the incentives for businesses to invest and get ahead. Now, the Leader of the Opposition and his colleagues in the Labor Party love to talk about the top end of town. Is he seriously suggesting, and that's what they're saying, top end of town, a business with a turnover of between $10 and $50 million is at the top end of town? It's like calling somebody who earns $90,000 a year a multimillionaire. Well, the Labor Party believes that as well. They are so out of touch with what makes Australia work. It is hard work. It is enterprise. It's investment. It's the private sector. It's the aspiration that mystifies the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. The business that needs to be supported, as the member for Grayndler knows, is being undermined and assaulted every day by the Leader of the Opposition. Now, I mentioned the member for Grayndler. There's a great Australian business in his electorate. Aussie Bum makes underwear, founded by Sean Ashby, and he says that the attack on his business and thousands like it will undermine the future of his business. This is a guy who started a business from scratch. The big retailers didn't believe in him. He went online. He's won the award for Australia's leading e-commerce exporter. He's got over 30 jobs there, and he wants to grow. He wants to keep growing, and he's funding his business from retained earnings, as all these family businesses are. And so the reduction in company tax that his company is benefiting from now enables him to invest more and to grow and to build his markets both at home and overseas and employ more people. And as he said, Mr Speaker, the question he asked, he said, I just wonder, asking about the Labor Party, if they would be so forthcoming if they had to explain how repealing the tax cut is going to benefit my business and, more importantly, my suppliers and my staff. Now, the member for Grayndler needs to stand up for Sean Ashby and Aussie Bum. He does. He does. He knows him. Well, he'll have an interesting chat. He'll have an interesting chat with Sean. I was speaking to him just a few minutes ago, and he shares your views about your leader.
Prime Minister's time has concluded. The member for McMahon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Has the government reached any agreements with One Nation within the last 48 hours?
Here.
I'll allow the question. The Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable member. I thank the honourable member, and I congratulate him on his recent appointment as the Shadow Minister for Small Business. Of course, there are many ways to create a small business. Most people start off with no business at all and build it up. Others, and I think the Shadow Minister would fall into this category, would start with a large business and turn it into a small one. And that's exactly what he will do to Australia's economy. It's exactly what he will do with Australia's economy and Australia's businesses.
Prime Minister, resume his seat. Members on my right. The member for Rights, the member for McKellar. It's becoming a regular customer, I have to say. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Point of order, direct relevance.
Members on my right. The Prime Minister has had he's completed. The member for Leichhardt. Member for Leichhardt has the call.
Thank you.
Members on my left. The member for Burt. The member for Leichhardt has the call.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House on why it is so important for a strong economy that businesses can have certainty around taxation and are supported by lower and simpler taxes? Is the Treasurer aware of impacts of alternative proposals?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Leichhardt for his question. He understands that our legislated tax relief for small and medium-sized businesses is part of our plan for a stronger economy, a plan for a stronger economy that is working. That has seen more Australians employed, over 1 million since we were first elected, 80,000 young people got a job over the last 12 months, unemployment rate coming down,
member for Lyons,
non-mining investment growing at 5 times the long-run average, Mr Speaker. Now, in the last couple of years, we have seen businesses less than 25 million already receiving the tax cuts and the tax relief. But in just next week, in a couple of days' time, businesses between 25 million and 50 million will also get tax relief from the 1st of July. That just happens in a few days' time, and that includes Capita, a wonderful business up in far north Queensland, a medium-sized tourism operator run by the Woodward family, been running for 40 years. It employs some 300 people in that business, runs the Rainforest Nature Park and tours and charters. It's a great business, Mr Speaker. They are getting tax relief next week. Next week. That's when they're getting tax relief. And there's a whole bunch of other businesses that the Leader of the Opposition would be familiar with, like Milltec Martin Bright out in Laverton North, where he's visited them. They have a turnover of just under $50 million. They're getting a tax cut next week. Victoria Wool Processors at Laverton North, they're getting a tax cut next week. Jacko Industries in Jandakot, Perth, they're getting a tax cut. Fairmont Homes out in southwestern Sydney, they're getting a tax cut, Mr Speaker. But in 1 year's time, if the Leader of the Opposition, if the Labor Party is elected, all of their tax relief will be stripped away. In just 1 year's time, they will be stripped away. Those businesses between $10 and $50 million over the next 10 years will pay $1 million on average extra tax over the next 10 years if this Leader of the Labor Party becomes the Prime Minister between now and then, Mr Speaker. And he's leaving 100,000 businesses in the lurch because he refuses to tell them, as does the Shadow Treasurer, about whether businesses between $2 and $10 million will also have their tax cuts ripped away from them in the same way in the captain's call from the Leader of the Labor Party announced this week that it will be ripping them away from businesses between $10 and $50 million. There's some 2 million people who work in businesses between $2 and $10 million in turnover. And the Leader of the Labor Party has by-elections coming up all around the country, and he owes it to the small businesses in those electorates, as to all small businesses around this country, to tell them the truth. He's done it once this week. I'm not excited about the fact or encouraged that he will make this a habit in telling the truth, Mr Speaker, but he should tell them the truth. Will he strip away the tax cuts for businesses between $2 and $10 million? It's a pretty simple question.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Has the government reached any agreements with One Nation within the last 48 hours?
The Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the honourable member for his question and understand his curiosity, but we never discuss negotiations with the crossbench. We don't.
Members on my left.
We have found that the most important thing to do when negotiating with other members of parliament is to treat them with respect, and that's what we do.
If the member for McEwen could just sort of, not miss the moment. Everyone else has stopped. We're trying to proceed. The member for Indi.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport and the Deputy Prime Minister. Minister, my question is on the $235 million North East Vic Railway Line project. And in February, the then minister told this House the scope of works would be released for community consultation in about the middle of the year. And it's now the middle of the year. My community is asking, when will the scope of works be released for community consultation? Who is responsible for developing and implementing the community strategy? And will you please, Minister and Deputy Minister and representative of the National Party, provide us the leadership we need to deliver on this multi-million-dollar commitment?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Indi for her question. It is the middle of the year, another year of delivery and achievement by the Liberals and Nationals. I thank the member for her passionate advocacy for North East Rail, and I also thank the member for Murray for similar advocacy. After detailed consultation with the community and the Victorian Government on the 16th of March this year, the Federal Liberal and Nationals Government, to which she refers, committed a further $135 million to upgrading the North East Rail Line to improve passenger services, bringing our total commitment to $235 million for this particular line. Now, this is part of our $1.6 billion investment, our commitment to the Victorian Regional Rail Revival, which is upgrading every passenger line in Victoria, including the member for McEwen, who's very noisy, including his seat. This additional funding for the North East Rail Line was committed to upgrade the NIRL to a Victorian Class 2 performance standard. This will allow for faster, more modern trains and give communities along the North East Rail Line the services they expect and that they deserve. The Australian Rail Track Corporation is working with the Monash University Institute of Railway Technology to ensure that the upgrades deliver what her community expects. Now, consultation with the community has begun, with key groups, including the Hume Corridor Collaboration Group and the Border Rail Action Group. They've already been consulted. The community will have the opportunity to understand what will be delivered and when, and this will also help to minimise disruptions. Detailed consultation on the delivery of the upgrades, including the scope of works, Member for Indi, will be undertaken by the ARTC in consultation with Victorian rail agencies in the coming months. Ultimately, it is the ARTC that is responsible for delivering these works, and I know that under the new chairman, Warren Truss, they will be delivered. Whilst the business case will need to be reviewed by Infrastructure Australia, I expect that upgrades to be underway by early next year, and delivered by 2021.
Pause for a second. Ministers up the other end with their signs can get rid of them, or I'll get rid of you. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The ARTC is already delivering improvements to the line to improve the ride for commuters. This is yet another investment to help people get home sooner and safer. Ultimately, it will be upgrades to rolling stock, which is the responsibility of the Victorian Government, to which they have committed to, which will deliver the services that the people of Seymour, the people of Euroa, Violettown, Benalla, Wangaratta and Wodonga deserve. Of course, this is a key passenger trunk route, as well as a corridor of commerce, a key part of the inland freight rail from Melbourne to Brisbane, which will bring more than $7 billion of economic development and prosperity to Victoria, and more than 16,000 jobs in the construction phase alone. Our $9.3 billion commitment to the Inland Rail is delivering that nation-building infrastructure that I know the member for Indi, her people will benefit from, as will the entire nation.
The Minister's time has concluded. Just before I call the member for Capricornia, I inform the House that we have joining us in the gallery this afternoon Commodore Pritchard, Chief of Defence Staff for Trinidad and Tobago. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you. The member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. Will the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on how regional businesses are using tax cuts to create jobs and opportunities around Australia? How would a different approach affect regional jobs and confidence for investment?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for Capricornia for her question. When you've actually run a small business, you understand how a little bit of tax relief goes a long way, and that's why the people of Rockhampton, Serena and throughout central Queensland, they've got a fighter in the member for Capricornia. She understands, she cares, she's delivering, she's getting results, Mr. Speaker. Results for businesses such as Artisan Gluten-Free Bakery in Rocky. Its owner, Simone Laurie, backs our plans to get on and build the Rookwood Weir and to cut taxes. She told the member for Capricornia, "I currently employ 11 staff here, but I'd love to put on more staff and provide more jobs." And I'm sure that this would be the case once Rookwood Weir is under construction. And tax cuts are such a great help. That's what she said. The member's getting results in infrastructure as well, with the investment in the Bruce, the Capricorn and the Peak Downs highways. We back jobs, we back confidence, and we're delivering tax cuts. That's what this Liberal and Nationals government is all about. We changed the law to make it easier for small and medium family enterprises, but now those opposite are threatening to take all of that away. But Labor is mystified by aspiration. They are. It's against a better deal for small and medium and family enterprises. It doesn't want to get better opportunities for central Queenslanders. In Longman, Labor wants to hold back the growth of more than 12,000 small and medium and family enterprises. It doesn't want cafes in Caboolture to grow and to hire staff. It wants to block brickies on Bribie Island from getting ahead. And we wonder how this so-called party of workers got to where they are. It might have something to do with way back in 1912 when Labor took the U out of Labor. And a very interesting book that I borrowed from the Parliamentary Library called The Federal Legislature. Now, It's right up there with the new Shadow Small Business Minister's book called Hearts and Minds, published in 2013. It probably sold more copies. Hearts and Minds is still available at bookstores, which are benefiting from tax cuts as brought about by the government. But in this particular book, there's a very interesting little table which talks about the Labor Party back in 1912, and it says that in that Labor Party, primary producers accounted for 4.2% of members, professional 16.7%, business commercial 14.6%. Listen to this one: tradesmen and workers 50%. 50%. Could you believe that? And union and party officials 14.6%. Compare that then to what we have now: staffers and unionists comprising 80%. 80% of those officers. Most of them have never worked a day in their life, Mr Speaker. Most of them have never worked a day in their life. That's right. They don't understand. The small business shadow minister, he doesn't get it. So I say to the people watching this telecast at home, I say to the farmers listening to the broadcast on radio, to the people of Longman, the people of Braddon and the people of Mayo, remember this. We know why Labor turned its back in 1912, because they've forgotten about you. They've forgotten about you.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the government reveal the details of its secret deal with One Nation before the July 28 by-elections or after them?
Members on my right, the Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, talking about personal discussions and conversations, I just noted in the Shadow Minister for Small Business interview with Alan Jones today, he was slipping and sliding, failing to defend his leader's captain's call. But he said, and just on your point, Alan, I'm not going to go into personal conversations that the leadership group or Bill has with us or I have with him. So there it is. Why not? But he says he always takes a very consultative approach. Mr Speaker, but there'll be nothing more consultative, I would say, than the event in Devonport on the 4th of July. It is when the Leader of the Opposition is having a business luncheon and is going to reveal Labor's plan for Braddon. And it's advertised nicely. There's the Leader of the Opposition and there's two young men there in hard hats and high-vis, and I'm just sort of wondering who they work for. Do you think they might be working for Penguin Composites? So
the
popular
Prime Minister will resume his seats. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Direct relevance, Mr Speaker. It's a really— if yesterday was a long bow, this one's extraordinary.
I do say to the Prime Minister the first part of his answer was completely relevant due to the wording of the question, but I think he's now beginning to stray into another area. The member for McMahon on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, could I ask the Prime Minister to table the transcript of myself on Alan Jones and any transcripts he has of himself on Alan Jones?
Members on my left, I'm just going to say to the member for McMahon, I've made the point on public documents. He's not going to use the House as a distribution mechanism for his transcripts. Okay. The member for Forrest.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Revenue and Financial Services. Will the minister update the House on how the government is working to help small and medium-sized enterprises thrive? Is the minister aware of any threats posed by alternative approaches?
The Minister for Revenue and Financial Services.
I thank the member for Forrest for her question, and she gets small and family-sized enterprises because, of course, she's built one. She's built one. She's built a dairy business from the ground
Member for
up,
McEwen.
and her husband is still working in that business. She knows how hard it is to work in small and family enterprises, just like those people on this side of the chamber understand that. That is why we are providing tax relief for all of those small, medium and family-sized enterprises, and for the 17,000 people and businesses in her electorate in Forrest. But regrettably, those opposite, unfortunately, either don't understand it or, worse, they actually want to punish these small, medium or family-sized enterprises. Thanks to a crazy captain's call from the Leader of the Opposition only this week, he is going to increase their taxes. He will hike up their taxes because, of course, he has declared war on small business. He believes that they are the top end of town. Well, I have news for him. They are not the top end of town, and the people they employ are not millionaires. In fact, these businesses employ more than half of the private sector workforce. Millions and millions of Australians are employed by these businesses. But despite this, the Leader of the Opposition stubbornly clings to his divisive anti-business plan. He clings to this because he wants to create something in Australia that doesn't exist, and that is class warfare. This is a guy who, of course, wants to embark upon a $200 billion tax and grab. Make no mistake that if he gets his way, this grand assault on the Australian economy will have devastating impact on the Australian people. It will have a devastating impact on retirees, on small businesses, on family enterprises, on women, on anybody who's actually employed, on those people who are trying to get into a job. This Leader of the Opposition is dangerous and he cannot be trusted. Whether you live in Caboolture, whether you live in Kangaroo Island, the Leader of the Opposition is punishing aspiration, he's punishing retirees, he's punishing small business. We have people who are prepared to stand up, people like Trevor Ruthenberg, who will stand up for the people of Longman, Brett Whiteley, who will stand up for the people of Braddon, Georgina Downer, who will stand up for the people of Mayo. The truth is, we know that the Leader of the Opposition, he's short on judgment.
Members on my left.
He cannot be trusted. He is unbelievable. He is unelectable, and according to the member for Grayndler, he is disposable.
I just remind the member for Greenway that she's been warned. Member for Greenway, just have your attention. You've been warned. Manager of Opposition Business has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Prime Minister visited Universal Trusses and spoke about the company in Question Time. Given the company is owned by the President of the Canberra Liberal Party, is the Prime Minister also planning to visit similarly independent businesses like MB Turnbull Proprietary Limited, Turnbull and Partners Holdings or Turnbull and Partners Proprietary Limited?
The Prime Minister has the call. The member for Chifley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member. I thank the honourable member for his question. Mr. Speaker, it says a lot about the character of the Labor Party that they are attacking a family business, long-standing Canberra business, and they're attacking it because one of their directors is a member of the Liberal Party. Maybe they all are. Maybe they all are. And what's wrong with that? It's not an offence
Members
to be a
on my
member
left.
of a political party. You know what? Here's the thing. We believe in free enterprise, we believe in business, we believe in family business, and we believe in jobs. And Universal Trusses is a great example of a hard-working Australian family business that is going to be hit by the Labor Party with higher taxes were they to get into government. And Mr. Speaker, they will be in exactly the same position as so many Australian businesses recently visited by the Leader of the Opposition, Milltec Martin Bright, steel manufacturer. Yes, their revenue is such that they will be getting the benefit of the tax relief this coming financial year, or Victoria Wool Processors, or the Northern Oil Refinery in Advanced Biofuels. or Jayco Industries that the Treasurer was talking about in Fremantle. The reality is there are hundreds of thousands of businesses across Australia that under Labor's new captain's call assault on family business will have their viability threatened by Labor wanting to put up their tax. It's an extraordinary time to imagine here in the most competitive global environment you could imagine, at a time when we want businesses to have a go, to invest, to employ, to be like Aussie Bum and export, to take on the whole world with their product, to be ambitious, to invest and grow. When we want them to do all those things, what is the message the Labor Party has for them? We're going to increase your tax. That is Labor's message. Higher taxes, less investment, lower productivity, fewer jobs and lower wages. That is what the Leader of the Opposition will be traipsing around the countryside delivering, going from one business luncheon to another, walking in to applause, no doubt, from all those people, delighted. So he hopes to be enjoying what the Deputy Leader describes as the privilege of paying higher and higher tax. Well, Mr Speaker, we know that Australians want to keep more of the money they earn. Australian businesses want to invest the money that they make in their business, and that's what they're doing, and that's why we have record jobs growth, and the greatest threat to that jobs growth is sitting opposite me today.
The member for Grey.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Will the minister update the House on how the government's competitive tax system is supporting businesses to link our world-class education services to the Indo-Pacific region, creating Australian jobs? And is the minister aware of any alternatives that would not provide similar support for Australian businesses?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Grey for this very important question. May I, at the outset, in relation to educational links into the Indo-Pacific, announce to the House that under the latest new Colombo Plan grants round between 2014 and 2020, 40,000 Australian undergraduates will have lived and studied and worked in our Indo-Pacific region. 40,000 young Australian ambassadors underpinning our engagement in the Indo-Pacific. On education services more generally, Mr Speaker, our impressive export performance is driven by businesses who compete in world markets and sell their goods and services overseas. Education sector is, in fact, through our education services industry, the third largest exporter in Australia, valued at $30 billion in 2017, and that's a 17.5% increase over 2016. Now, our education services sector could grow even more if the businesses that were delivering education services could be more competitive on the world stage. That means lower corporate tax rates so that they can have more money in their business, invest more and create more jobs. And we must be aware of the fact that our competitors in the education services sector internationally are countries like the United States and the United Kingdom and other OECD countries that have far lower tax rates than Australia. In fact, on the OECD tax scale, Australia is now one of the highest, the second highest. So we back SMEs like ARO Educational Services in the electorate of Mayo at Bridgewater. They are providing horticultural training, agribusiness training. They want to expand internationally, and they've in fact received an export market development grant from the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment so that they can expand globally. Or MRWD, a training company in Caboolture in the electorate of Longman. They've set up training centres across Australia. They too want to expand their educational services into the Indo-Pacific and beyond. And they have also received an export market development grant from the Turnbull government. So on this side of the House, we are backing businesses in the education sector to sell their services overseas by giving them tax cuts, a lower tax rate by giving them export grants. We back small businesses in the education sector. On the other side of the House, they've declared a war on business, they've declared a war on education sector, and they've made them competitively.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Retail, hospitality, fast food and pharmacy workers will have their penalty rates cut again this Sunday. Why does this Prime Minister support cutting the penalty rates of over 11,000 working Australians in Longman by up to $77 a week, while he's giving an $80 billion handout to big business and the top end of town? Is the Prime Minister telling these hard-working Australians who are having their penalty rates cut again this Sunday to get a better job?
Hear, hear.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, we know that the honourable member is baffled by geography and mystified by aspiration, and she's also way off target with her class war. This is a Deputy Leader of the Opposition who describes businesses with turnovers of above $2 million of being at the very high end. We absolutely won't support tax cuts at the very high end, she said, when asked by Michael Rowland about their policy, the captain's call policy, which he has studiously avoided any association with. What she has done is in her claim to be concerned about the biggest companies in Australia, is threatening the viability of millions of small companies and hundreds of thousands of family-owned businesses of the type we've been discussing here today: Stubbs Construction, the Aussie Bum, businesses with 30, 40, 50, 60, 100, 200 employees. This is where 4.8 million Australians work. They work in the businesses whose viability is threatened by the Labor Party. And they can go on with their class war as long as they like. But in these businesses, these family-owned businesses and their employees know that Labor is coming after them. And it'll be very interesting to see as they go to their business lunches and go around visiting businesses seeking approbation for putting up their tax. Mr Speaker, every business knows that Labor is a threat. It's a threat to the business, it's a threat to the employees, and, Mr Speaker, it's a threat to every one of those 4.8 million jobs. It is private business, the business sector that employs 90% of Australians. Labor is declaring war on the businesses that employ 90% of Australians. They have abandoned the workers. They are a threat to the economy. They're a threat to growth. They're a threat to jobs, and they're a threat to wages.
The member for Bennelong.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. Will the minister outline to the House how the government is creating jobs and supporting workers in defence industry manufacturing and sustainment? What impact would other ideas have on the growth and job security of the workforce behind the Defence Force?
The Minister for Defence Industry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Bennelong for his question. The member for Bennelong knows, as do most members of the House, that the government is involved in the largest build-up of our military capability in our peacetime history. $200 billion of spending building our capability, defending our nation, keeping it secure. Part of that, of course, Mr Speaker, one of our major motivations, our second priority after capability, is growing Australian industry, jobs, businesses, investment. And in Australia, almost all of the 3,000 businesses in defence industry are small to medium enterprises. Virtually none of them would be described as primes. Mr Speaker, we are helping those businesses by giving them an entree into that huge spend in a way that no government has done before, and we're also helping them by reducing their company tax rates, making them more competitive, helping them to invest more money in their own businesses. Businesses in the member for Bennelong's electorate, in fact, like Sonatec Atlas, or in Fisher, In Caboolture, Mr Speaker, Helimods provides components for Navy helicopters. In Mount Barker, in Mayo, Ceromatech, Technical Ceramics. In Dunkley, way out evacuation systems, Mr Speaker. In Tangney, AVI, who export ruggedised, secure routers to the US Air Force. In Braddon, Delta Hydraulics, Mr Speaker, who provide precision hydraulics and components for defence in Devonport. We talked about Penguin Composites yesterday, and Delta Hydraulics in Braddon are doing similar work in defence industry, Mr Speaker. These kinds of businesses cannot afford to have Labor pulling the rug out from underneath them, increasing their company taxes, chopping and changing, belting small businesses. We've seen that Labor wants to belt household incomes, hard-working Australian families. We know that they want to do that by increasing their income tax. Now we know they want to increase the company tax for small and medium enterprises in the defence industry, Mr Speaker, who are desperate to grow and employ more Australians. Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has a war on business. He said that himself. He has a war on business, but it's really a war on Australians, on hard-working families, on small businesses, on higher wages, on investment and on growth. There was a time when the Labor Party stood for growth and jobs, Mr Speaker, in the Hawke-Keating government in particular, Mr Speaker, and the right wing of the ALP must be absolutely aghast. The member for McEwen, the member for Hunter, the member for Rankin, the member for Eden Monero must be absolutely aghast at where the Leader of the Opposition has taken the Labor Party. I know that it impresses the CFMEU. I'm sure it impresses the CFMEU to have a war on business, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition has put the CFMEU ahead of his own colleagues. No wonder they're frustrated, like the member for Bass. Patsy rang in, she was frustrated. The member for Bass rang in because he was frustrated. It's time to change.
The minister's time has concluded. The member for Lindsay.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister tell 67-year-old Jacqueline from my electorate in Lindsay in Western Sydney, who is also a grandmother of 3, why she's been forced to wait 5 months for her pension application to be processed? Why is this Prime Minister doing everything he can to support an $80 billion tax handout while making older Australians like Jacqueline wait so long?
The Prime Minister has the call. The member for Gilmore.
Well, I thank the honourable member for her question. If her constituent Jacqueline has been waiting that long to get an application processed, then I'd ask her to give me the details of her constituent, and we'll make sure that her application is processed in due time.
The member for Latrobe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs.
The member for Sydney's warned.
Will the Minister update the House on the importance of a strong, united and consistent approach to border protection? Is the Minister aware of any risks to the integrity of Australia's borders?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question, the hard work he's doing in Victoria representing the people of his electorate, particularly those people who are here on visas, committing crimes against Australian citizens. The honourable member for Latrobe has worked really hard to make his community a safer place, Mr Speaker, by cancelling those visas of criminals in our country, and he should be applauded for that. Mr Speaker, I notice in what is one of Australia's great publications, daily publications, the Courier Mail. In this morning's Courier Mail there was a poll which demonstrated to us that in the seat of Longman, less than 1 in 3 people believe that the Labor Party is capable of protecting our borders and keeping our country safe. Now, Mr Speaker, that should come as no surprise to anyone who has watched recent history in this country. People don't forget the fact that the Leader of the Opposition was a Cabinet Minister in the glorious years of the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd period, when 50,000 people came on 800 boats, Mr Speaker, and tragically 1,200 people drowned at sea. Now, Mr Speaker, I notice that also it needs to be recorded, because it is a fact in history, and not to contradict the Prime Minister about the Shadow Treasurer in relation to his new title, but he hasn't always been in favour of making big businesses small. There was a period in his distinguished parliamentary career where he was adamant on making small businesses big. but not in our country, Mr Speaker. He was a champion of the people smuggling business in Indonesia. And, Mr Speaker, when he was the Minister for Immigration in the glory years of the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd period, he presided over 398 boat arrivals. 25,092 people arrived on his watch, and we know that tragically he put 4,200 children into detention. Now, Mr Speaker, if that wasn't bad enough, the Labor Party want to do it again. And if you're in Longman, or if you're in Braddon, or if you're in Mayo, you have an opportunity at the end of July to send a very clear message to the Leader of the Opposition, send a very clear message to the Labor Party that you do not want a return to that dysfunctional period where Labor and the Government of Australia lost control of our borders. We cannot afford, Mr Speaker, in this day and age to lose control of our borders again, and the people in Longman know that they have in Trevor Ruthenberg a man that will stand up to people smugglers. Big Trev, he's a champion of Longman. He is going to be a great member for Longman, Mr Speaker, and I'm confident that he and many others will realise that we cannot afford a return of the Labor Party because it would see a return of people smugglers in this country.
The member for Hotham.
Thank you, Speaker. Prime Minister, yesterday the Royal Commission heard about ANZ's treatment of the Handley family, whose farm struggled with drought and fires. ANZ reneged on an agreed overdraft and overcharged interest on the Handleys' accounts. When Elizabeth Handley received adverse biopsy results, ANZ refused to reschedule their mediation. She was later diagnosed with cancer. Why is the Prime Minister rewarding the big banks with a $17 billion handout?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, the testimony that was given in the Royal Commission reveals unconscionable conduct, and the ANZ Bank is being rightly held to account. I'm disappointed that the honourable member wants to call that in aid to an argument about company tax. The reality is this. The reality is this. The reality is this. That we are determined to ensure that the wrong that has been done will not be repeated, and that those in the financial services sector who have done the wrong thing will be held to account. And the government has been demonstrating its determination to do that, as you've seen from one case after another. I'd refer, for one good example, one very substantial one, the $700 million fine that the Commonwealth Bank has recently paid following Austrac's work. So we are determined to ensure that those wrongs will not be repeated, and that those who have done the wrong thing will be held to account.
The member for Canning.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Small and Family Business, the Workplace and Deregulation. Will the minister update the House on how the government's tax cuts for small and medium businesses are benefiting the economy, and what are the risks to the business sector posed by different ideas?
The Minister for Small and Family Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Canning for his question, and note that recently we were touring his electorate, talking to small and family, medium-sized enterprises that, as the Treasurer mentioned earlier, as of next week, will enjoy further tax cuts. And, Mr Speaker, in the spirit of bipartisanship, I do congratulate the member for McMahon, the Shadow Treasurer, for being made full-time the Shadow Minister for Small and Family Business, especially given his strong history and association with them. I do note, though, I am pleased, and many people make reference to the book that he has written. In good news, Mr Speaker, I don't suspect we'll have a book on how you run a small and family business, because the member for McMahon could write what he knows about that on the back of a postage stamp. That said, Mr Speaker, in his defence, the Leader of the Opposition could write what he knows on the top of a pinhead. Mr Speaker, In Western Australia, there is a building called Daly and Shaw. They employ 40 full-time employees, 250 subcontractors. They turn over $40 million. Their profit margin net is around 2%. That's the part that gets missed by the Leader of the Opposition. Big turnover businesses do not necessarily mean big profit businesses, yet they employ big numbers of people. The 250 subcontractors, for whose profitability, it's not just the 40 full-time people here, Mr Speaker. The 40 full-time people, yes, they employ on the profitability. Their employment resides on the profitability of this business, but the 250 subcontractors also do. And what do? They spend back in the local economy. In the last 4.5 years, under the Turnbull Coalition government, there has been a net increase of 40,868 small and family businesses in construction. In Labor's last year, Mr Speaker, there was a decrease in the number of businesses operating in construction of 2,232. Those 40,868 construction businesses account for the 200,000 jobs of the 1 million, 20% created in the last 4.5 years. Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition, the Shadow Treasurer and their reckless plan to attack business irrespective of size. There is one thing, one surefire result. They won't just hit the businesses in question. If you attack small and medium and family businesses, you are also attacking their employees. That is the part they miss. They've never done it. They don't know what it looks like, yet they want to offer themselves up as an alternative with their economic plan. I say not now, not ever.
The member for Port Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, every government senator, including the Finance Minister and the Minister for Resources, teamed up with One Nation to vote to call on the government to facilitate the building of new coal-fired power stations and to retrofit existing power stations. Given the Finance Minister voted for this motion, can the Prime Minister advise how much taxpayers' money will be allocated to build new coal-fired power stations or retrofit existing ones?
The Prime Minister has the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the government's policy is technology agnostic and facilitates investment in all forms of generation. It facilitates investment in all forms of generation. Our focus is on reducing energy prices. That is what our policy is directed at. And we are starting on the 1st of July with reductions in most states in the national electricity market. And that means from this weekend, a local takeaway shop in Queensland with Origin or Energy Australia could save between $400 and $766 a year. A hairdresser in Queensland could save $243. A winery in South Australia with Origin could save between $370 and $840. Now, these gains can be locked in by the National Energy Guarantee. It provides a technology-neutral framework to encourage investment in all forms of generation and energy infrastructure. Investment certainty is what is required. Now, I know the honourable member for Port Adelaide, whose seat has been abolished, believes, and we sympathise with him there, but I know that he believes he knows more about the energy market and energy economics than every player in the market. He reckons he's got it all worked out. Well, that's good, because if he's not returned to Parliament, he'll have a brilliant career. He'll be able to be the chief executive of one big energy company after another. But for our part, we see government's job as ensuring that there is the investment certainty that encourages people to invest in generation, invest in transmission, invest in storage, so that you get lower energy prices. And we are already delivering on that. We are turning the corner on energy prices across the national electricity market. They are coming down from the 1st of July, and of course wholesale customers have been receiving the benefit of much lower wholesale prices and lower gas prices for some time. Our plan is working. We are bringing energy prices down, and the problem for the honourable member and his leader, while they're going around the countryside over the winter telling people they're going to put up their taxes, they'll also be telling them how they're going to jack up their energy bills as well.
The member for Fisher.
My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the minister outline to the House how a stronger economy enables the government to deliver a long-term health plan for the people of South East Queensland? What effect would other approaches have on the delivery of health services in Queensland?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Fisher, who, amongst other things, has been a passionate advocate for eating disorders and helping people not just in his own electorate, not just in Queensland, but around Australia, as are many members of this House. And I was pleased to join him recently where we commenced the national pilot in relation to better services for those with eating disorders. He knows that no government can do this, however, as well as supporting things like the PBS, unless fiscal circumstances permit. And we know that because Labor said that in their own 2011 budget when they deferred 7 major medicines. But fiscal circumstances do permit this government to make record investment in health, and that's because there's been a plan for the economy, and that's produced more than 1 million jobs. And in turn, that's allowed us to provide record funding for Medicare, an additional $30 billion for hospitals, including $7.5 billion in Queensland, and support for every new medicine for the PBS. On the 1st of July, so this Sunday, we will be listing Kisqali. Kisqali is a new breast cancer drug. It will help over 3,200 women who would otherwise have had to have paid $70,000. I recently met, along with the member for Bonner in his electorate, women in South East Queensland who will benefit from this medicine. So these are tremendously important developments. Another thing we're able to do in South East Queensland is to support drug and alcohol rehabilitation in Caboolture, in the electorate of Longman. It was a project advocated and fought for by Trevor Ruthenberg, Big Trev. He is Big Trev. I've stood next to him. And you know what? He's big-hearted, and above all else, he fought for drug and alcohol rehabilitation for Longman. And we're delivering drug and alcohol rehabilitation for Longman. And the reason we're doing it is because it matters. But I'm asked whether there are any other alternative approaches. In Queensland, the federal Labor Party pretends there are cuts to Caboolture. False. We're adding $120 million. State Labor is ripping $21 million out. But it's not just that case, because like others, I saw the poll in the Courier Mail today, and that poll identified health as the #1 issue in Longman. But what is interesting is it asked the question, which plan and which leader do you most trust on health? It said on health, Bill Shorten, 42%. It said on health, Malcolm Turnbull, 57.8%. So the people of Longman are on to the Leader of the Opposition. They don't trust him, and nor should anyone.
The minister's time has concluded. The member for Richmond.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware the Australian reports today the Nationals have drawn up a set of demands for the Prime Minister, headlined by the creation of a fund of up to $5 billion that would deliver government money for new baseload generators, including coal-fired power? Has the Prime Minister agreed to use taxpayers' money to fund new or existing coal-fired power? And is this part of cutting a deal with One Nation to give an $80 billion handout to big business?
Yeah. The Minister for the Environment and Energy.
Under the National Energy Guarantee, power prices will fall, Mr Speaker. That is why businesses and their representatives, representing over 5 million workers, were in the parliament this week to confirm that the National Energy Guarantee is in the national interest, Mr Speaker, and it will mean lower wholesale prices by on average 23%. That means for the member for Gilmore's electorate, businesses like Nowchem in Nowra, with their 65 employees, a 40-year-old family-owned business that will benefit from lower energy prices. District Meat Abattoir in Milton, Mr Speaker, will also be better off with their 35 employees. And as the Prime Minister said, prices have started to fall across the main states from 1st of July. And we're also seeing, whether you're with an emerging retailer like PowerShop and you run a small business in Queensland, you will see up to a $1,470 saving in your power bill each year, Mr Speaker. If you're a household, a family, you will see a saving of more than $800 a year. Now, Mr Speaker, we know what it takes to get power prices down. That's the action we're taking. But those opposite are the greatest threat to lower power bills, Mr Speaker. The member for Port Adelaide, in his own electorate, Adelaide Brighton Cement, saw through the blackout with 185 people at their business. They lost power for nearly 36 hours, Mr Speaker. It cost them $13 million. And the member for Port Adelaide, do you know what he called it? Do you know what he called the blackout in South Australia? A hiccup, Mr Speaker. That's right. A hiccup. But the member for Port Adelaide, he's now lost his seat. He's now lost the presidency. But there is a new job coming his way, Mr Speaker, because I went to the member for Port Adelaide's profile on the internet, Mr Speaker, and this is what it said. It said the member for Port Adelaide, in addition to everything that he's done, he served as the member for Grainler's campaign manager, Mr Speaker. Campaign manager in October 2013.
The Minister for the Environment and Energy will resume his seat. No, that's fascinating but irrelevant. We'll just go to the next question. The member for Wide Bay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Regional Development, Territories and Local Government. Will the minister update the House on how businesses and workers in regional Australia are benefiting from our plan to deliver a stronger economy, including in my seat of Wide Bay? Is the minister aware of any threats to small and medium businesses across regional Australia?
The Minister for Regional Development.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Wide Bay for his question. His advocacy for his community is very well recognised right throughout the Wide Bay Burnett region, and that is ongoing advocacy. Be it in Gympie, Maryborough or Noosa, the coalition is delivering a stronger economy, more jobs, more confidence, more opportunities. We have a plan for regional Australia, Mr Speaker, and we are getting it done. Australian workers and businesses are definitely benefiting from the coalition government's pro-jobs, pro-growth, pro-investment agenda. The coalition's regional jobs and investment package, for example, have seen close to $700 million invested in local infrastructure projects right across the nation, creating more than 11,000 jobs. More than $14 million of this, Mr Speaker, was invested in the member's own electorate. This includes support for Dale and Myers, an iconic timber and recycled wood processing business in Maryborough, beefing up their processing facility, allowing them to bring on 10 new staff, supporting 10 families in the Maryborough community, spending more money, investing more of their hard-earned in the local community. Now, our tax relief package is seeing family businesses like them employing more people, spending more money right across the nation. And they are up to it because they know they've got a coalition government that's backing them in. Now, Mr Speaker, if we compare that with the war on business led by those opposite, we'll understand where those risks are. Last week, Labor voted against giving more than 52,000 low and middle-income earners in Wide Bay much-needed tax relief. This week, they announced they would slog family-owned businesses with increased taxes. Now, as sure as night follows day, Mr Speaker, Labor will keep pounding Australians, family businesses in particular, with bigger and heavier taxes to pay for their spending addiction. Now, this opposition leader believes the Labor Party of waste and mismanagement, pink bats, You remember those overpriced school halls, cheques to dead people, is better place to spend your money than you are. What a ridiculous notion. Under Labor, Dale and Myers Timber is just one of the thousands of businesses that Labor clearly does not care about. They'll be put to the sword by this mob. I've spoken to the boss, Curly Tatnell, and he is worried about Labor's tax hike. He knows, Wide Bay knows, that those opposite would simply have their dead wood in their team mean less jobs and more taxes
time has
for Queensland.
concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to
the Leader of the Opposition. Just resume his seat for a second. The member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The member for McEwen made an unparliamentary comment, and I would ask that that be withdrawn.
The member for Corangamite will resume her seat. Members will cease interjecting. Did the member for McEwen make an unparliamentary? No, we can.
I'm happy to stand up, but I'm getting a bit tired of these false accusations.
No, the member for McEwen will resume his seat. The member for Corangamite. No, the member for Corangamite will resume her seat. Members on both sides. No, we just need to finish with this. We're not going to have a debate about the matter. There's an established practice for dealing with this that occurs every time. I'm just going to ask the member for McEwen to stand up and answer the question whether he made an unparliamentary.
As I said before, no, I didn't.
Thank you. The Leader of the Opposition.
Okay. My question's to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's made a choice to support pay cuts for nearly 700,000 workers and give tax cuts to multinationals. He's made a choice to take $17 billion from the schools and give it straight to the banks. He's made a choice to cut funding for public hospitals, and he's giving a handout to private health insurers. Why, when he's given the choice, does this Prime Minister always choose the top end of town?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, when the Leader of the Opposition was targeting the top end of town, he was in Burnie. He was going after Stubbs Construction with 60 jobs. He's in Hume going after Universal Trusses with 60 employees. He's at Varsity Lakes on the Gold Coast going after Evolve Skateboards with 15 staff. He's going in. He's there down in Braddon. He's going after Penguin Composites, just like his candidate down there, Justine Kay. When, of course, Penguin Composites is another one of those hard-working Tasmanian family-owned businesses that are going to be slugged by the Labor Party if they get hold of the reins of government and can jack up their taxes. And what about people? We saw him with a picture there on his flyer for his business lunch in Devonport. That'll be great. That'll be so. You can imagine the applause. Imagine the applause that he'll be getting there from all those people. I wonder whether anyone from Bridge Pro Engineering will come up to Devonport. He says he'll let me know. Well, that was a business started in 2010, started by Aaron Brimfield, structural engineer, trained at the University of Tasmania. It's got $16 million turnover. He started it with 2 staff. It's now got 60. It builds bridges, jetties, general construction. That's the type of family-owned business the Leader of the Opposition is going about. He likes to hang out with people in hard hats and high-vis, but he's threatening their jobs in Tasmania and all around Australia.
The Leader of the Opposition seeking to table the document.
Yes, just the invitation to the Devonport Chamber of Commerce next Wednesday. People are welcome. It'll be a very good event.
Is leave granted? Leave's granted.
Winner.
The member for Barker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Aged Care. Will the minister update the House on steps the government is taking to support aged care providers to deliver quality aged care and support communities? Is the minister aware of any other proposals?
Members on my left, the member for Barton, the Minister for Aged Care.
Mr Speaker, thank you. I thank the member for Barker for his ongoing interest and commitment to aged care and your ongoing commitment in the way that you work with local people. The government's crackdown on quality failures since South Australia's Oakden scandal is evident. 39 residential aged care services have been issued with serious risk notices this financial year as of the 30th of April and up from 22 from the previous year. For the member of Wakefield, just listen carefully, you'll hear the answer. The bottom line is there will be no compromise on aged care standards. To ensure quality care, the Coalition Government has worked with the aged care sector to develop new single quality framework which will include a single set of aged care standards, improved quality assessment arrangements, improved information about quality for consumers with a greater focus on outcomes. The member for Wakefield, if you'd been interested in what was happening at Oakden, you would have raised those issues much earlier. We want to support our aged care providers to understand these new standards, and that's why we announced $50 million in the budget to support residential aged care providers transition to the new standards. The Turnbull government is committed to supporting aged care small businesses, unlike the Leader of the Opposition, who says to thousands of family-owned small and medium businesses across the country, if he's elected, he wants to increase their taxes. Let's not forget that this opposition leader wants to dip into pockets of self-funded retirees, and people who've worked hard all their lives do not deserve to have their hard-earned funds ripped from their pockets. This will affect 3,534 people in Braddon. It will also affect 4,356 people in Longman. A vote for Labor is a vote for their plan to raise taxes and raise retirement incomes. Increasing taxes for small businesses and aged care providers will mean the opportunity to increase the number of staff in nursing homes is diminished and will not be realised. It also reduces the potential for future innovation, investment and business expansion. The aged care providers deliver care for our loved ones in aged care, and this opposition leader's war on small and medium businesses not only undermine but impacts on our aged care sector. Let me say, the Leader of the Opposition's decision to increase taxes on businesses with turnovers between 10 and 50 million is an attack on small and medium businesses and millions of Australians they employ. And he refuses to guarantee that the tax relief already legislated for small businesses with turnovers between 2 and 10 million will also be impacted. Let me say the impact is across this nation.
Time has concluded.
And I decline.
The member for Wills. I'm sorry. The member for Wills. All right, I'll be generous. The member for Wills was just stretching. The member for Sydney has the floor.
Thank you. I was lucky you didn't buy a house that way. My question is to the Prime Minister. On Sunday, 700,000 workers will get a pay cut. Does the Prime Minister support the cut to penalty rates?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on Sunday there will be thousands of workers in the hospitality sector and in the fast food sector who will not get penalty rates at all because unions have traded them away. Unions have traded them away. Oh yes, the big unions that pay their bills, just like the workers at Cleanavent had their penalty rates traded away. The SDA and others trading away the penalty rates of their workers. The reality is this: Labor is utterly hypocritical on the matter of penalty rates. For years and years, for over a century, Labor has said that it stands for the independent umpire, for the conciliation and arbitration, for fair work, laws that were passed when the Leader of the Opposition was responsible for them, and then, after hearings in which all the submissions were heard, they didn't like the outcome and so they wanted to disown it. But when it came to the crunch, when there was an employer that was prepared to pay some money to the union, oh yes, the Deputy Leader shakes her head. She's so sad to hear the truth. The fact is, big unions have been taking money from big business to trade away workers' penalty rates, and the only thing the Labor Party hates about that is getting caught.
The member for Fadden.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Will the Attorney update the House on the impact the Commonwealth's changes to call-out powers for the ADF will have for Australia's national security?
The Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question and for his fine contributions to our Defence Forces over the years. Today the Turnbull government introduced the most significant and substantial reforms to the way in which defence call-out powers operate in over 20 years. Of course, as well as the economic security of Australia, the national security and keeping Australians safe is the foremost priority of this government. To explain to the members of the House the substance of this change, it's necessary just to have a quick look and have an understanding of how the present rule operates. At present, the ADF is not able to be requested by a state who might be in a terrorist situation unless that state and the relevant authorities consider that the state is utterly overwhelmed and unable to respond to that threat. Now, the difficulty with that, Mr Speaker, has been that it has been an incredibly high threshold, a very inflexible threshold, and it's not a question that could be properly answered by any proper state authority until some distance down the timeline of an offence itself. That has not worked. The view that was taken after the inquiries into the Lindt Cafe siege was that that is a standard that needed to be cautiously and sensibly changed. At the heart of the changes that we have brought in with the bill into the House today is that that standard changes to a more flexible and sensible standard, where the state authorities, usually state police, would need to consider the nature and scale of the terrorist threat that they were facing, and then consider whether there were any particular specialist ADF assets, skills, service personnel who could be brought to bear to improve the situation, the response, and help save Australian lives. And for the benefit of members of the House, it's not particularly difficult, unfortunately, to consider and conceive of the types of situations that we and the Turnbull government are now preparing our country for. When we looked at the terrible events and the tragic events that occurred in Paris on 13 November 2015, in the space of about 43 minutes, 3 suicide bombers detonated bombs. There were 3 separate shootings at different locations in cafes and bars across Paris. The Bataclan Theatre was subject to a multiple shooter incident where 89 French citizens lost their lives. Those people died. Others were subsequently used in a hostage situation where the attackers were wearing suicide vests. Now, it is an unfortunate reality of the world in which we live that that type of situation is not unconceivable in any Western democracy, and it's also not unconceivable the way in which, had that or a similar or analogous situation unfolded in Australia, the present standard for ADF call-out would not have been met. So it is a very sobering thing to think that it is a need for legislative change that we have brought into this House today, with great cooperation from all of the states and territories, coalition and Labor governments. I'm looking forward to working with members opposite on the passage of this bill. But this is an example of the way in which, on a bipartisan basis, we can make Australians safer, the way in which the Turnbull government has that as an absolute priority, and the way in which the fine service men and women of our ADF can potentially help save Australian lives.
Yeah. The Prime Minister.
I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
I thank the Prime Minister.